This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development by a group of guys with one thing in common. We love Drupal. Recorded live on Wednesday afternoons in a Google Hangout. Visit us at talkingdrupal.com. This is episode 63, September 10th, 2014. Drupal Intranet. Good afternoon, everybody.
Afternoon.
Howdy.
We are talking about intranets today. How exciting. You know, it is exciting. I can't wait to talk about it, actually. You know what? I often thought to myself, what is the difference between an intranet and a secured website? Not a whole lot, right?
Well,
So I'm looking forward to talking about that today.
I think it depends what your secure website, the purpose of your secure website is.
Yeah, so in my mind, sometimes an intranet is about, just secured content. It's about a group of people that have access to content and features, and they can get to it because they have a username and password. Like, is that different from an intranet or a closed community? So I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Yeah, I think there's different levels of it. I mean, I think one is, what you described, and then there's another aspect that most people would probably classify as intranet is when the content isn't accessible out of a specific location. So you can't access it from home without VPNing. You can't access it from your phone. You have to be on the network or the company network in order to access it.
So Nick, we're jumping into this thing so quickly. I'm going to hold you there, and I started it. I apologize. But let's get some intros under the way. So we do not have Jason with us this week. He is off and doing his thing. But we do, as usual, have John Picozzi from Oomph. Welcome, John.
Good afternoon. Looking forward.
You are looking so sharp today on the video here. You are dressed like you're in the office, but you're at home. What's going on?
I gotta head out later on today. I'm actually teaching my first class tonight of the new term. So I put on a shirt with a collar today, even though it's dressed from work from home.
You
Wednesday.
shaved and you showered. So tell us about what you're teaching.
So this term, I'm teaching at Johnson Wales University in Providence, Rhode Island. I'm going to be teaching Advanced Coding and Design 2, which is the second step of the web development and design curriculum at Johnson & Wales. So last spring, I taught the first level of that class, and now teaching the second level. Kind of happy to see that a lot of the students that are in it are actually students from the previous class. So
that's great.
They don't hate me.
Yeah, I was going to say that you didn't scare them away, huh?
Yeah, that's it.
Is it because you were too easy? Is that what's going on?
No. I think from what my reviews said, they enjoyed the content and they felt like they really got a lot out of it. So
that's
hopefully I can continue that trend.
Congratulations on a new semester. I know that Johnson & Wales was trying to get you to do some more classes, but you had to think about your time personally to make that happen. So they're lucky to have what they have from you.
Yeah, time is a commodity right now, and they were looking for a little bit more of it. Unfortunately, I couldn't oblige them, but there's always retirement.
That's true. So they can come back to you in 20 years, is that what you're saying?
Sure. Absolutely.
We also have Nick Laughlin from Enlightened Design, as usual. Welcome, Nick.
How you doing? Looking forward to this topic as well, and I'm not teaching any classes, but maybe it's time I start exploring that because it seems like a good way to get back to the community. A little bit different than the face-to-face Drupal community, but still rewarding.
It seems like it would be in your wheelhouse too. You are very open in sharing stuff on IRC, sharing support here on this podcast, and anytime that I email you with a Drupal question, you typically reply within 60 seconds. So that might not be the great portfolio for a professor, but I think that's your wheelhouse, so something you should look into. So today's show, actually before we get into today's show, I want to just mention something that we usually do at the end of the show, which is we usually talk about our iTunes reviews. I'm going to just move that up to the front of the show this week, just for a quick second, just to thank everyone who has given us an iTunes review in the past. And over the past 3 episodes, we have asked people to make iTunes reviews, asked them to reach out to us, and I've been pleasantly surprised by the number of people who've done so. When we sit behind these microphones every week and we talk, and we're up to 63 episodes in a little over a year, it's hard to understand how many people are listening. And it seems like there's more people listening than maybe we thought. And we don't always ask for people to tell us they're listening. We just started doing that, and guess what? They're telling us they're listening, which is great. So I just want to mention this up front because I think there's a great lesson here for you to ask people for things, and they'll give it to you. So I just want to mention this great review we got from Dave in the UK on September 2nd. I'm going to read it to you. And it's 3 sentences here that says, "This is a solid show covering a large variety of topics. I'm a WordPress dev who's slowly moving into Drupal for more complicated projects." That's an interesting point, which is why I wanted to read this today. He's a WordPress guy, and he needs to do bigger and better projects. So Drupal is his solution. And then he moves on to say, I wanted a podcast that would not only describe certain development situations, but also suggest modules. I've picked up on a long list of great techniques from these episodes. The well-maintained show notes are very useful for finding and remembering the discussion modules as well. The hosts also are willing to talk about the times they've got something wrong, which is refreshing. A great show, props from the UK. P.S. I can't believe this podcast doesn't have more glowing reviews. Listeners are so crazy. So, Dave, thank you again from the UK. But he tipped on a couple of things here that were, I think, really important for us and for the show. One is that we are trying to be, this show is about being honest about our experiences and the things we're going through, and we don't ever have claimed to have all the answers, but we're willing to talk about the things we know about. And our answers may be wrong at the time, and they be right 12 months later. So he touched on that, and he also mentioned that the number of modules that we mentioned. I wanted to also mention that we've just recently opened up a new page on our website. That's the module of the week. We mention those every week. We've never documented them other than the show notes. There's a new page on the website, module of the week, and it only has probably 1/3 of them in there right now. We're in the process of updating that content. So by the end of next week, they should all be there.
I also wanted to mention that that's as much for our listeners as it is for us.
Yeah.
Keeping track of 63 modules that we've done so far, 64 modules that we've done so far, and making sure we don't repeat is...
it's a challenge, right?
It's a challenge. This will make it a little bit easier.
So I do want to bring up this review up front in the show because we do appreciate anyone talking about us either through email or iTunes. And the feedback that we get from you is also valuable for helping the show be better in what we deliver in content. So let's move on to our topic of the week, which is intranets.
So can we go back to the debate we were having at the beginning of the show?
Yeah, let's go back to what is an intranet. Let's go back to there. That's a great way to start.
So, I don't disagree with you guys. Well, I guess I do a little bit, but my idea of an intranet really isn't like a password-protected website. It's a really a password-protected website that is used by employees of a company to disseminate information to those employees that the employees need to either do their job or live their lives. So to me, that's kind of what an intranet is. It's very much internal to the company for company, to keep the company running. or to to help their employees.
John, I completely agree with that, with your description of it. I guess the way I'm looking at an intranet from a Drupal side is that many of the features and functions that I would use in Drupal in a password-protected website are very similar to what's in an intranet, which is why I said that. A lot of the stuff that the minute I put a password that it's content that only private people can see, it's the same kind of functionality that I'd be building for an intranet, which is sort of why I positioned it that way.
Yeah, I think intranet's another key differentiator is also the level of complexity. Mm-hmm. I think they can range from any level, a bunch of different levels of complexity, but I think a lot of times when you're talking about like a true intranet, you're really talking about a higher level of complexity with some of the things we're going to talk about, like file management and communications and information distribution and stuff like that. So
what would you say are a number? Let's talk about a list of features that we would consider that a company. So we're going to talk about a company intranet right now. Are things that they would have as features in an intranet. So we kind of scale what we're talking about here.
Yeah, that's an interesting topic or an interesting question. It's kind of a hard question too because they can range widely from company to company. Some of the basic things are communications, so ways for employees to communicate with one another or communicate between departments that they don't want to do via email. So sometimes that can be achieved by a message board or some sort of integration with a internal chat program, something like that. Also, file and document repository. A lot of companies require that they have, some sort of file storage solution that their employees can get to find, HR documents or job-related materials, requirements for doing a job, government standards, that sort of thing. Also, other uses for intranets have been to disseminate information. So the company has these departments, and the departments have information that they want to give to the employees. Oh, it's Ben's 20th anniversary with the company, or hey, we're being inspected by the labor standards board, and we need everybody to be on their best behavior, something like that. So communicating that sort of stuff out to the employees is also important.
There's a couple other features too. Typically you'll have some sort of workflow management or some sort of ticketing management. It really depends on the kind of company and the needs of the company. I think the definition of what an intranet is has been expanding. I think five years ago, or even a couple of years ago, intranet meant it ran locally on the company servers. It was only accessible from their network. I think with the proliferation of the cloud, that's really expanded to just company-specific information where there's really no public-facing side. Everything is private. So if somebody were to visit it, they would just get a login prompt. So that it's accessible from everywhere, but all the information is only meant for internal consumption. It's not meant for marketing. It's not meant for customers. It's not meant for clients. It's meant only for employees to manage their processes and information. So
do you guys have some examples of interesting intranet implementations?
I've only worked on a couple. One of the more interesting ones I would say would be a workflow management tool for a newspaper so that they could manage their sales pipeline and manage some communication between sales and the production department. it used a lot of Workbench, used a lot of rules, used a lot of couple of interesting modules, but it's really just a workflow management tool. I mean, it's accessible everywhere, but you have to have a login, so nobody from the public can see anything on the website. But it's all about having a repository for their process.
Yeah, one of the larger intranets that I built was for a local healthcare provider, and it was a interesting project with a lot of ins and outs, namely permissions. So they were doing a lot of document storage as well as information. Each department had a company website, and that the employees could access to find out different information. And the permissions side of it was kind of a big hurdle to overcome, because there was many different levels of permission, and different levels of permission had access to different files and functionality on the site. So it was an interesting project. It was an awesome project to work on.
That's actually a really good point, because I would say that typically can be a differentiator. I mean, the amount of different roles and fragmented roles that internet projects generally need are far more granular. I mean, many websites can get away with 2 or 3 roles. Visitor, content editor, and admin. But when you have an intranet and you have different departments, different managers, different branches of the company, it's sometimes difficult to pin down exactly what permissions a particular person needs. So you need to build them in such a way that it's granular enough that you can grant permissions to a manager to manage 2 different branches, but not a third, and vice versa.
So some of the things I was thinking about and things that we built for people in the past, and opportunities for companies that they might not realize could be great intranet solutions, would be, it's a way to I'm going to give you a few things here. Share sales numbers across the organization, marketing information in terms of HTML pages and documents, a lead database. You could build very easily in Drupal a lead database for your sales organization. How about department level newsletters? What's going on in the department in an organization? Newsletters that you could share with the rest of the organization. How about just an employee database? Who are the employees that are in your company? What's their contact information? Who are they? Employee blog pages. I mean, the list is endless in terms of things that you can do in a Drupal database. And a lot of companies look to larger solutions to get these done today.
Yeah, it's true, Steve, and that's kind of what I went back to, what I was talking about at the beginning of the show. It's really, when you start off on an intranet project, it can branch out into a bunch of different areas and have a bunch of different features. And the one thing I would recommend is make sure you get a good feature set before you start development, so you can definitely nail down what's going to be necessary. But you are right, there are a bunch of different uses the company intranet can have.
So it sounds like the real defining factor of an intranet versus just a regular website is the audience.
Absolutely.
As you said, you might need blogs, file management. There's tons of stuff that you can. There are tons of things that you can do, and the larger the company, the more opportunity there is to find those features. But it's really just about the audience and who can access it.
And Nick, it's funny. I'm not sure it's always the larger the company either, as well. I think sometimes it could be how distributed the company is. So an intranet for a company that might be virtually based. So even if you have 15 employees, and every other employee is located in a different location, an intranet solution could be a really valuable tool in terms of communication across a small company that's distributed, which is what we're finding in today's world. I mean, people don't all sit in the same office all the time. And when they don't, a tool like an intranet can really help out with the communication and sharing of information. It doesn't all need to be emails. It doesn't all need to be text messaging.
Yeah, and I think that that's a good point too. I mean, you can do a lot of this stuff in Drupal, but an intranet doesn't have to be only Drupal. I mean, it's very common. I'd say it's more common in intranets than external sites where you're integrating with third-party services, whether it's a bug tracking system or a instant chat system or Google Drive or Dropbox. It's very common to be interfacing with solutions specific to your needs and just having them in one place.
Yeah, that's one of the things we talked about last week, our episode last week, which was the tools we use, episode 0, so talkingdrupal.com/episode 062. We talked about the tools we use, and if you go back and listen to that episode, that conversation was, I would say 90% of that conversation was about interacting with other people and the tools that we mentioned. It was a lot of stuff about sharing content, sharing information, and those tools are great. But when you get inside your own company, some of the company-specific information is where this intranet concept comes in play.
The other thing is too, let's not pin this down to just companies. I mean, the company intranet is a thing that exists in the real world, and I think we've all used one of them in one way, shape, or form. But also, educational institutions have intranets. I mean, for example, for my class, I have an intranet portal that I log into that's specifically for educators and posting up documents related to the class, posting grades, doing announcements to the class without relying on email. And one of the examples we'll give later on in the show is how a university, actually a college, is using Drupal as a tool for its intranet, and along with Google, and they're really succeeding at doing that.
So thank you for bringing me back to my opening comment, which was sometimes an intranet is really about being password protected content for a select group of people. So before we move on to functionality, let's talk a little bit about why Drupal is really a tool that people should consider when they're trying to create an intranet. Why is it a great solution for that?
Well, there are a lot of reasons. The kind of three that pop into my head are it integrates well with a lot of third-party platforms. Mm-hmm. 2, it's very extensible. It's easy to build modules if there isn't integration already built for it. And 3, it's free. A lot of the out-of-the-box solutions out there, not going to mention any of them, just saying that a lot of them out there charge a bunch of money for you to use them, and some of them charge per user, some of them charge per feature, but at the end of the day, your organization or university or whatever is spending a lot of money on this intranet solution when it doesn't really have to.
Yeah, and I don't think it's so much the cost always, because sometimes the cost is reasonable. I think the bigger issue generally is the customization. A lot of these out-of-the-box solutions, yeah, they have a wide variety of modules and add-ons and and upgrades, but they're not tailored to your workflow, to your employees' demographics and location, and your particular company's needs. It's just, hey, do you need chat? Then this is the chat that we have. Maybe you need chat logging to remain compliant with some industry, for some industry certifications, and the out-of-the-box solution doesn't provide logs. So the Drupal allows you to really customize the intranet to meet the needs of whatever company is utilizing it.
Yeah,
I looked at the benefits of Drupal for an intranet in really 4 categories. One is cost that John already touched on. A second one was time to market. I do think, in my experience with using other tools or being involved in projects with other tools like SharePoint, the time to market to get the product up and running turns into very long cycles. I don't think that's the same with Drupal. So I think time to market is an issue. Resource availability is another one, is that you can really find lots of resources that are relatively inexpensive in a Drupal marketplace. It's a hard thing to say, right? Us Drupal programmers are cheap, but that's not my point. My point is that a proprietary solution will probably yield you a much higher developer time to price point than you're going to get in the open source market for some of these tools. So I do think you have a wide variety of resources available for you as a company if you want to extend what your intranet is doing. You're not tied into a particular vendor. You're not tied into a particular product. You've got an open source solution. And really, go ahead, John.
Oh, I was just going to say the other point there is too that something we don't realize is, to your point, if you don't have or can't find people that can do, we'll use SharePoint for an example, that don't know SharePoint or can't do SharePoint, training is costly for those people. Not to say that training isn't costly for Drupal, but most of the training and documentation for Drupal is on the internet and is free of charge. So we're coming back to that cost thing, but the cost of training somebody on how to work with the system is much lower, I would say, with Drupal than with some of these proprietary solutions.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about some of the features on an intranet that fit really nicely into the Drupal model. The first one that comes to mind to me is user management, and connected to that is single sign-on. So when you're dealing with an intranet, you're dealing with employees that are already logging into other systems into your network, and oftentimes that is Active Directories on Windows, or it could, in general, let's just say an LDAP interface. So Drupal supports LDAP. It also supports CAS, a Central Authentication Service, which is a Java-based single sign-on solution. I don't know if you guys have any experience with any others, but those two solutions encompass a lot of single sign-on, meaning that when an employee signs into your local network, they'll automatically get access to your Drupal intranet system.
Yeah, I've used LDAP, the LDAP module in the past, and it really works really well for not duplicating a user account, but allowing you, again, to use a single sign-on and to have the ability to verify whether that user is actually in the LDAP directory or not. And if so, it has built-in functions that allow you to choose what to do with that user if they're not. The simplest being, if they're not in the LDAP directory, create a Drupal account for them and let them log in. So I think that module is actually very useful. I do believe there's also if you're using Google services, I believe there's a single sign-on module for Google as well.
So authentication should not scare you away if you're considering using Drupal as an intranet solution. Just check into it.
Yeah, it is a scary topic.
It is.
When I was first given the task to set up LDAP, I was like, oh God. But there's some good stuff online to read up on, and it's pretty easy as far as getting it up and running and connecting to the LDAP server and all that stuff.
Not to dive into LDAP. I'm just curious, John. Was the Drupal website sitting on a Linux server or a Windows server?
It was
connecting to LDAP.
It was a Linux server.
Okay, all right. Just curious. We don't need to go into the reasons why I'm asking that today. All right. So another key feature I think for Drupal being great in an intranet is the content management. I think this show has Drupal developers generally listening to it. I'm not sure we need to dive into this too much in terms of all the value of the content management features, but you do have lots of permissions-based workflow, content owning modules that will allow you to really customize who can create content, update content, and manage content on your intranet. Do we need to say anything else about that?
Well, I think it's probably worth bringing up Workbench briefly, at least.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, Workbench, for those that don't know it, is kind of it's a workflow management tool. It's a lot to pull in. It's not one of those modules that you just install it, enable it, and you're good to go. It takes a little bit of study. At least I found a little bit of study to get running, but it allows you to do things like, for example, when content is created, it's not published, it gets put in a queue for users of role X, and then that user can read it and say, this needs more work or this is ready to go, and they can publish it. You can control how that goes by taxonomy, by user, by a multitude of things, and it integrates really well with rules, views, and a couple other core Drupal modules. Anytime I'm working on a project now that has non-standard workflow, Workbench is generally the first place to start looking. It's very, very powerful.
Yeah, it really is a great module, or set of modules, I should say, for managing that kind of those kinds of workflows. A lot of even non-intranet sites have asked about workflow and managing workflow, editorial workflows like that, and I keep going back to workflow and workflow access and all the submodules that come along with it.
So we get user management, content management, resources. So often in intranets, we're dealing with managing resources. I hesitate to say also assets, but I think assets are a piece of it. So you could be managing company documents, which I feel that Drupal handles pretty well right out of the box. I'm a little bit more concerned about images and stuff that Drupal handles, but it's a great way to manage resources that other employees need in the company.
Yeah, I hesitate to say that it's not the best solution. I mean, Drupal still needs some work on media management. Media 2, the Media 2 modules come a long way. Scald, I've only looked at very, very briefly, but I've heard good things. But it's difficult to say that it's a solved problem. Drupal does give you the tools, rudimentary tools to manage documents, and it allows you to get by, but it's not, by no means, as I said, by no means a solved problem. But you're not going to. Document management is a much more difficult problem than people generally give it credit for, and Drupal does a very passable job at solving it.
I think it comes down to what the customer's requirements are in that area.
Absolutely. I think you can do, as Nick said, a passable job with it based on the requirements and a good understanding of those requirements. In the past, I have assigned a content type just for files or documents or whatever the media that needed to be handled was. So using content types as well as IMCE. IMCA actually has a pretty nice file browser in it that allows you to kind of manage files directly on the server. Of course, it's geared more towards images, with resizing and whatnot, but it does let you upload and delete right on the server, as well as go in and out of file directories. So there are a couple of nice tools in there that you can use.
Believe it or not, I haven't really used IMCE until about this week, and I used it on a site that was using that was managing self-hosted videos, and I found it fantastic. I mean, it allows you to upload videos are large, and uploading them through the UI is really error-prone. So the ability to just rsync or FTP the video files on, and then still connect them to a node.
Link to them, yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I think it really is. I've tried to use media in the past and not had a bunch of success with it. I think it's a lot easier and a lot easier to implement and a lot easier to use than the media module.
Yeah,
we always make these little comments about the media module. I think at some point in the near future we need to have one of the developers from that module on the show, because we are always dinging it just a little bit, right?
Yeah, and it does a fantastic job. I mean, one of the reasons why it's difficult to embrace wholeheartedly is it complicates permissions in a non-intuitive and non-Drupal way. And it complicates display modes. It nests display modes at least 3 levels deep at the most basic level. So it makes managing it it's just that much more cognitive load when you're trying to manage it and develop for it. But it does solve the issue of reusable content and browsing content and restricting who can see which assets very nicely.
I think what it's trying to do is solve a really complicated thing in a module, in a single module, that's very difficult to do. So,
yeah. I agree with that. But on the flip side, I don't know that I would use the media module for document management anyway. Even if it was a great solution, I don't know that I would go that way.
For document management, it all depends on what your customer needs, and out of the box, like sort of file uploads may handle most of what you need for document management, depending on what the situation is.
You could even use a third-party solution like Dropbox or something like that. There are integrations for Drupal with Dropbox. And that could be the solution that your company decides to use. It really goes back to what Steven said originally, with what are the requirements? What does this thing need to have?
So let's move on to collecting data from intranet users. Like web forms is a great tool for an intranet environment for a department. I can just picture HR department or the entertainment department just easily creating forms to capture information from employees.
It's actually interesting that you bring that we're talking about this, because I'm actually working on a project right now that's a semi-intranet. It's actually the public-facing side of the intranet. If that makes any sense.
So it's a public website.
It's a public website, but it interfaces with the intranet.
Okay.
And one of the issues that has recently come up is how well web forms are managed and how to integrate web forms with their workflow. So, for example, they get a response to web form. They need to be able to assign it to somebody, and then that person needs to be able to mark it as responded to, or for example, and I'm finding that that's not that's not as an out-of-the-box solution that Webform provides as it could be. I think Entity Form
Yeah,
does a little bit.
It's not a ticket
Yeah,
management system. If that's what
exactly.
you're saying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But as far as just getting responses, it's I mean it's the best one out there.
And it's awesome because an employee can easily create a new form. That's one of the awesome things about it, right?
Yeah.
One of the great things about web form is that you can hand it to a customer and they can create a new form,
Yeah.
and it's really easy to use.
Yep.
That's probably the best thing about it, from my perspective.
I would agree with that.
So the next thing, well, let's just talk about on things you might need in an intranet that Drupal could easily provide, which would be search. And we've talked about search in the past. Did we have a whole show on search?
I think so.
We did. Okay.
I think we did.
I don't know what that number is, so we can't refer anyone to it.
I'll look it up.
Unless Nick can find it quickly. So search is, from Drupal, we have some basic search. You have third-party options, Solar, and the Google search as well. I don't know that we need to go into anything else here other than if you're going to have an intranet, you need the ability for people to find content, and Drupal provides that.
It's episode 42.
Thank you. So talkingdrupal.com/042 if you want to learn more about what we think about search.
Absolutely.
So intranet, next thing is collaboration. So what would an intranet be if employees could not interact with each other? Probably a great intranet. But so if you don't,
depends who you ask.
yeah, exactly. Do you actually want people talking to each other? No. So let's assume we want people collaborating. The Drupal forum is certainly an obvious start for an intranet to get a forum online. What other collaboration tools?
So there's a group of guys out of Babson, James Barnett and Dave Sawyer, and I think they've worked with a couple other people that have been working on a module, I believe it's called Drupal, that integrates Drupal with Google Drive and Google Hangout, and it's really fascinating. It's Babson is on Google Apps, so they're able to kind of do that single sign-on system that John mentioned earlier. So when somebody signs into the Drupal website, they're automatically signed into their Google account. And then when they're on, for example, a class is an organic group. When they're on an organic group, they have a little pop-up thing on the side that shows other class members, and they can check off 3 of them and hit Start Hangout, and a Hangout window will pop up with the 3 people added to the Hangout. Or they can say Start Document, and it will start a Google document shared with the 3 people they selected, or 5 people, or however many. Same thing with spreadsheets, presentations, anything that you can do in Google Drive. And this kind of ties everything together, but allows people to quickly collaborate on. So you have a group of 3 employees that are, part of a subcommittee to solve a specific problem. They can just create a group, start a Google Hangout, and get to work without having multiple tabs, multiple windows open, just in one place.
So yeah, James from Babson and Dave Sawyer from OHO Interactive actually presented on this topic at DrupalCon Austin, and I had the privilege, I guess you could say, of sitting in on that talk, and it was absolutely phenomenal. We'll actually put the video of that talk in a link to it in the show notes, so you can watch that at a later day and time. But yeah, it was really cool, and James actually gives a demo of how they're using Google Talk and Google Hangouts at Babson, and Very cool, very cool. University intranet that does a really great job of using a third-party service with Drupal to connect all of their students and faculty together.
So what would you say are the... We only have a few minutes left here in the show, so I'm going to ask you quick. Do you have any, as people who've built intranets, do you have any challenges that you want to point out? Things to pay attention to if someone's taking on an intranet project?
My biggest thing is really planning. Do a ton of planning up front.
Planning particular to what, John? Anything particular?
Yeah, particularly to...
Because every project needs planning, right?
Yeah, particularly to user permissions and roles, as well as content and content types. Yeah. Get a good feature list up front before you even start. Before you even install Drupal, get a feature list that you've signed off on with either your client or with your company stakeholders to say, like, these are the features that we're going to roll out in phase 1, and then from there definitely think about your user permissions, who's going to be able to edit what, who's going to need to be able to access what, and then also your content structure and content types. And those two things kind of go hand in hand, the user permissions and content structure, content types, because certain levels of users may be able to access certain levels of content, but other users may not. So you definitely think about those things before jumping into an intranet project.
Yeah, I've got a bit of a different perspective. Because, as Steven said, a lot of that's, it's a bit more complex generally with permissions on intranets than regular internet websites. But one thing that's radically different is the deployment and development process. So if it's a pseudo intranet where it's actually online and accessible to everyone, then you really have to, turn off XML sitemap, make sure that robots don't get in there, make sure that people have to be authenticated. But if it's a true intranet and it's going to be on their servers and on their network, then it's really important that you figure out things. For example, like what kind of system are they on? Do they have a Linux server for you that has Apache, or are you going to have to figure out how to deploy it on Windows? How is performance going to be? Authenticated users are going to be way higher on an intranet than on a general website. So how is performance? And I would say even just deployment once it's been launched. How are you accessing their servers if you need to do a bug fix? It's a very different process many times than if it's hosted on Media Temple or Linode or DigitalOcean or something. Do you have to physically drive to their offices with a thumb drive? How is it handled? And that's I would say the biggest gotchas are the deployment process. You don't want to be expecting a regular Drupal deployment and then get there and be like, yeah, we have this Windows 2008 server, and you're going to have to launch it on there. And then the second big thing is authenticated users. Almost 100% of people on your website will be authenticated.
Yeah, Nick, I agree with that. You can mitigate the authenticated users a lot of times by the type of intranet site you're trying to achieve. But definitely think about your network structure and think about users and that sort of thing. The other thing to think about is third party. How you're integrating with third parties. So Steve talked earlier about kind of like a sales platform where you're tracking sales contacts and leads and stuff like that. If you're integrating with Salesforce or even some levels of Google and you're behind a firewall, you're doing a true intranet where no public can get to it, you may have problems integrating with those services and may have to come up with other solutions or look for ways to work around that. So that's another thing to think about.
So two things I want to mention just before we get to the module of the week. One is that there are two distributions, and there's probably more, There's two that come to mind when you think about intranet to me. I'm not sure why these two come to mind. Maybe it could be marketing or exposure or whatever, but one is Drupal Commons, which I've used. Another one is Open Atrium. Both of these distributions provide functionality that is in the space of an intranet. I think Drupal Commons is a little bit more on the social network side than Atrium is. Atrium may be a little bit more stronger on the more traditional intranet functionality. But I just wanted to mention those two. Do you guys have any experience with those distributions?
Yeah, a little bit of both.
Okay.
I try not to use them extensively internally, but I've used them both. They're pretty polished. They're massive, so they're sometimes difficult to customize and manage the upgrade process. But they're really polished and well put together, well thought out.
It's a great starting point for somebody for an intranet. It could be a great way to get something rolling.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. So let's move on to the module of the week.
Oh man, this is a good one.
So module of the week this week is block title link, and it was actually introduced by somebody who you'll be meeting next week, I believe, to me on a project this week. And what it does is it allows you to point the block title to a URL. That's exactly what it says. I don't know what else to say about it. It allows you to link the block title, and it's very quick.
Is it a little bit more important than that, though? Isn't it a little bit more about how you can semantically define that title?
I didn't use it that way. I just used it as a link. It was one of those things where I needed a solution. Tim mentioned it. I installed it, enabled it, and had it working in less than 2 minutes.
At the end of the day, it really is, though. It's one of those modules that you can drop in, and it achieves the goal very quickly without you having to build a block template and do PHP coding to pull in your link field to get the link to wrap around the title and all this other stuff. So I'm a big fan of that one. We actually I had to use that a couple of weeks ago on something, and
I need to look into it some more about the semantic piece.
But anyway, so the mystery person is Tim, who works for me, and he will be on the show next week. So let's move into the exit or the outro for this show. So, John.
The exit strategy.
The exit strategy here for today, because I know you're on a hard stop at 2:30, so you go first.
I will gladly go first. I'm actually looking forward to our Oomph company retreat this weekend. So I will be in the woods of Maine, doing some team building and getting to know the Oomph team a little bit better. Looking forward to that.
John, how many employees at Oomph do you think that you do not know yet, that you haven't actually talked to in any way? Have you talked to everybody, or
I have.
Is this an intro for you?
I have talked to everybody. One of the things we try to do when a new employee comes on is to have them spend a little bit of time with each employee in the office that they are not from. So I did go when I started working at Oomph up to Boston and sat for about 5 minutes with everybody up there and just talked to them about their job and what they like and don't like. So
this weekend gives you an opportunity to sleep with everyone at Oomph. I couldn't resist.
I don't know. Our CTO is kind of hairy. For me, you can find me on all the social networks at John Picozzi and always on at oomphinc.com.
All right, how about you, Nick?
You can find me at NixFan on pretty much every website, NICXVAN. And next week I'm talking Drupal on Wednesday. I think I may see you guys tonight at the Providence meetup.
Okay.
Or not.
I cannot attend. I had a previous engagement, so
You'll see Jason there.
you will see Jason there.
I'll
So,
be teaching class. Steve's got a busy life. You'll see Jason.
so let's give Jason a few things here. So he couldn't be with us today, but you could also see Jason next week speaking about responsive technology at the Web Unleashed in Toronto. So if you're a Canadian or an American heading to Toronto next week, make sure you give Jason a good Talking Drupal shout out. At the end of the month, he'll also be at Artifact East in Providence. That's on October 1st. So if you have not signed up for that, I believe there's still tickets available. I could be wrong, but give it a try. It was a great conference. I attended that last year. It's well worth the money spent and the time spent for that conference. So check that out. So for me, I'm Stephen Cross. You can find me at Stephen Cross with a PH on Twitter. My company, we are doing our first webinar on October 7th. You can sign up for that at parallaxinfotech.com. It's about responsive design. It's free. It's 60 minutes. So it's probably worth your time. Anybody have anything else to say?
If it's free, it's for me.
Yeah, if it's free, it's for me. All right, guys. And we will talk next week.
See you next week.
Take care.